I want you to close your eyes for a second. Well, unless you're driving, of course.
Yeah, please keep your eyes on the road if you are.
Right, definitely do that. But if you are somewhere safe, just picture this really specific scene for me. It is the middle of the 9th century.
Okay, setting the stage.
You are standing on the warm, sun-baked coastline of the Mediterranean. And if you listen closely, you can hear the gentle, rhythmic lap of these warm, blue waves against the shore.
Sounds incredibly peaceful.
It is. You can smell the olive groves baking in the heavy summer heat. And in the distance, there's this incredible, ancient mingling of sounds.
Like what kind of sounds?
You have the ringing of Christian church bells from an Italian coastal town, right? And that sound is kind of bleeding into the melodic call to prayer from an Islamic minaret across the water in North Africa.
Oh, wow. So you're right in the heart of it.
Exactly. It is the absolute cradle of civilization. It's serene, it's ancient, built on the bones of Rome and Carthage. And then I want you to just shatter that image completely.
Oh, here we go.
Because gliding right into that pristine blue water, cutting through the Mediterranean swells, is something that fundamentally does not belong there.
Not even a little bit.
No, it's a fleet of wooden longships, dragon heads carved into the prows, packed with fair-haired warriors from the freezing gray waters of the far north.
Which is just wild to visualize.
Right. They are thousands of miles from home. They have sailed completely off the edge of their known map.
It is an image that feels almost anachronistic. Like if you saw a painting of it, you would assume the artist just made a mistake.
Like a glitch in the historical timeline.
Exactly. Total glitch.
Yeah.
But it is entirely 100% real.
And that glitch is exactly why we are here today. Welcome to the deep dive.
I am so excited for this one.
Me too. Our mission today is to unpack one of the most audacious, mind-bending, and honestly bizarre expeditions in all of human history.
Audacious is definitely the right word for it.
We are unpacking a massive multi-year raid into the Mediterranean in the 850s, led by a man whose very name sounds like a mythological invention, Björn Ironside.
Yes. Bjorn Ironside.
And for those of you who know the basic Viking history, like, the raids on Lindisfarne, the settling of England, we are going way beyond that today.
We absolutely are. And I think we need to set the historical stakes for you right from the jump here.
Let's do it.
Because this wasn't a localized raiding party crossing a narrow channel to hit some undefended monastery in the dead of night.
Right. This wasn't a quick hit and run.
Not at all. This was a massive fleet sailing into the heart of civilizations that were significantly older, exponentially richer, and crucially, much more heavily armed.
Yeah, it's a big point.
And centrally organized.
Yeah.
Way more than anything these Norsemen had ever encountered. It was this unprecedented collision of worlds that pushed the absolute limits of human endurance, naval engineering, and asymmetric warfare.
I am so ready to dive into the mechanics of this, because you have two worlds colliding that had absolutely no geographical business colliding.
None. They shouldn't have ever met.
But before we put these men on those boats and push off into the Atlantic, we have to understand the psychology, right? And the leadership structure that makes an expedition like this even possible.
Oh, absolutely. You don't just wake up one morning in a fjord and say, hey, guys, let's go find the Mediterranean.
Exactly. Let's sail for 3 years and see what happens.
Yeah.
You need a very specific kind of command dynamic. So let's look at who is actually leading this charge.
Well, we start with the man whose name is on the marquee, right? Bjorn.
The legend himself.
Right. In the Norse sources, he is famously known as the son of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok.
Which is a huge deal.
It's massive. And his nickname in Old Norse is Ironside, which translates to Ironside. And that name alone tells you a lot about his geopolitical capital in the 9th century.
Right, because if you read the sagas, his brother, Ivar the Boneless, he gets a lot of the historical ink for being the cunning strategist,
Yeah, the mastermind of the great heathen army in England.
Exactly. But Bjorn's nickname implies a totally different utility. Like Ironside implies someone who is an absolute localized physical force on the battlefield.
That's the perfect way to look at it. The legend paints him as a warrior of such raw resilience that it was as if his sides were literally forged from iron.
Which is a terrifying image for whoever is standing across from him.
Completely terrifying. Now, we have to look at the mechanics of how a reputation like that forms, right?
Right, because he didn't actually have metal skin.
Sadly, no. The more grounded historical interpretation is that he was simply an incredibly skilled, incredibly strong fighter who possessed this uncanny battlefield awareness.
Like a sixth sense for combat.
Yeah, exactly. In a shield wall, survival isn't just about pure strength. I mean, it's about spatial awareness, knowing how to deflect the kinetic energy of a spear thrust, reading the chaos around you.
And Bjorn clearly had that.
He had to have. He survived countless engagements without taking a crippling wound, which, in the 9th century, is practically a superpower.
But, the contemporary Norse culture wouldn't just attribute that to, like, spatial awareness and good reflexes.
Oh, definitely not. This is the Viking Age. They view the world through a lens of fate and divine intervention.
Right. So what's the legendary explanation for the Ironside moniker?
Well, the mythological framework, which you find in the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, involves his mother, Aslog.
Okay.
She is depicted as the daughter of the mythical hero Sigurd.
Wait, Sigurd the Dragon Slayer?
The very same. So there's serious pedigree there. The legend claims she gave Bjorn a magical charm, like a woven blessing, that made his body entirely invulnerable to metal weapons.
Oh, wow. So they literally believed he was magic.
Yeah. But whether you approach this as a modern historian analyzing his battlefield survivability or a 9th century Norseman believing in runic protection, the functional identity is exactly the same.
Which is what?
That Bjorn was the unstoppable force. He was the banner that men would enthusiastically rally behind.
And what's fascinating to me, and you see this if you look at the broader Scandinavian political landscape, is that his legacy back home operates on a completely different frequency than his brothers.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Like, he doesn't just go west, carve out a kingdom in Dublin or York, and fade into the Anglo-Saxon chronicles.
He arcs right back to the homeland. In Swedish historical tradition, Bjorn Ironside is regarded as a foundational figure.
Really? Like a founding father?
Exactly. He's the legendary progenitor of a royal dynasty known as the House of Munso.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, there is even a massive burial mound on the island of Munso in Lake Mälaren, which is near the old Swedish royal center that is traditionally called Bjorn's Barrow.
So in the Norse memory, he isn't just this wandering exile or a rogue raider.
Not at all. He is a kingmaker. He carries the immense gravity of royalty.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. So we have Bjorn, right? The charismatic, invulnerable royal vanguard.
Face of the operation.
Right. But I was looking at the logistics of this expedition, and it's obvious he isn't executing this alone. I mean, you don't manage a 3-year multi-ocean deployment on raw charisma alone.
No, charisma doesn't feed thousands of men.
Exactly. He has a co-commander.
He does, and this is where the command dynamic becomes just a masterclass in leadership synergy. Bjorn's partner in this venture is a man named Hastin.
Hastin. Okay.
Sometimes spelled Hastin in Norse, or Hastingus in the Frankish Chronicles.
All right.
And if Bjorn is the raw physical powerhouse and the royal figurehead, Hastin is the operational architect.
So I have an analogy for this. Because we often fall into the trap of thinking of Viking warbands as just like a mob of guys following the biggest guy with an axe.
Which is a huge misconception.
Totally. But this dynamic, Bjorn and Hastin, it reminds me more of a modern military command structure or even like a tech startup.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, you have Bjorn as the visionary founder with the pedigree, right? He's the idea guy. And then you have Hastin as the hardened chief operating officer who actually knows how to keep the company from going bankrupt.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy, yes. Hastin was significantly older. He was a veteran survivor and an absolute master of political and military scheming.
So he had been around the block.
Oh, many times. He had been raiding the complex river systems of the Frankish kingdoms for decades before this Mediterranean expedition was even a thought.
Wow, decades. So he really knew what he was doing.
He did. He understood how continental empires functioned. He knew how to read the shifting political landscape of the Carolingian dynasty.
Which was incredibly complicated at the time.
Very. And most importantly, he knew the grim, day-to-day mechanics of managing thousands of men over long, grueling, heavily attritional campaigns.
He knew how to keep them alive.
Exactly. In fact, the legends often cast him as a mentor, almost a foster father figure, to the young, ambitious Bjorn.
It's a synthesis of necessities, then. Like Bjorn brings the Ragnar Lothbrok brand name.
Yes.
If you are a young warrior in Denmark or Norway, you join the fleet because you want to say you sailed with the son of Ragnar. That's your ticket to Valhalla.
Right. It's the ultimate prestige.
But Hastin is the reason you actually survived to tell the tale.
Exactly. You can rally a fleet with charisma, sure, but you cannot navigate the Bay of Biscay or calculate caloric requirements for a massive warband on pure enthusiasm.
No amount of hype is going to patch a leaky boat.
Exactly. Haston provided the strategic gravity. He knew when to engage, when to negotiate, and when to execute tactical deceptions.
All right, so let's transition from the command tent to the physical reality of what they are actually attempting here. Because having a bold idea by a fire in a longhouse is one thing.
It's the easy part.
Right. But the physiological and physical reality of putting a fleet of wooden boats into the open Atlantic Ocean and turning south, that is an entirely different nightmare.
It is a logistical gauntlet that we really need to deconstruct to fully appreciate what they did.
So what are we looking at in terms of numbers?
We are looking at a fleet of roughly 62 ships leaving the Frankish coast around the year 859 AD.
62 ships. That's a massive armada for the time.
It really is. And their objective was to sail south along the Atlantic coast to the Iberian Peninsula, so what is today Spain and Portugal, and squeeze through the highly contested Strait of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean.
And we have to talk about the naval engineering here, because anyone who has studied maritime history knows the Viking longship is a marvel.
An absolute masterpiece of engineering.
Right. It's clinker-built, meaning the hull planks overlap, making it incredibly flexible in the water.
Yes.
And it has a remarkably shallow draft, sometimes just 3 feet, right? So it can glide right up a river in Francia and land directly on a beach without needing a deep water port.
That shallow draft was their primary asymmetric advantage in Europe.
Because it let them strike anywhere.
Exactly. It allowed them to completely bypass heavily fortified coastal cities and strike deep inland where the standing armies couldn't mobilize fast enough to catch them.
Right. But, and this is a massive but, the exact design features that make the longship a riverine nightmare for the Franks make it a terrifying liability in the open ocean.
Oh, a total liability.
Because these are open boats. There is no deck. There is no cabin. If you are a listener right now imagining a pirate galleon with captain's quarters, erase that from your mind.
Yes, erase it completely.
You are sitting on a wooden bench, completely exposed to the sky.
You are hitting on the fundamental misery of this expedition. I mean, the flexibility of the clinker-built hull meant that in heavy seas, the ship would literally twist and flex with the waves.
Which sounds terrifying.
It does, but it's actually what kept the ship from breaking. It absorbed the kinetic energy of the ocean rather than shattering against it.
Right.
But, and this is the huge downside, that meant it took on water constantly.
I want to focus on the physiological toll of that, because you aren't just sitting there enjoying the ocean breeze.
Not at all.
You are in the Atlantic, off the coast of Portugal, which is notorious for violent, unpredictable weather systems.
The Bay of Biscay alone is a graveyard for modern steel-hulled ships.
Right, so if a massive swell crashes over the gunnels, you are bailing water. And not with a mechanical pump.
No, with wooden scoops.
With wooden scoops. For hours.
And you are doing it while absolutely saturated in freezing salt water.
God, that sounds miserable.
It is. This is where we have to look at Norse clothing technology, because it's honestly the only reason they didn't all die of hypothermia in the first week.
Wait, really? What were they wearing?
They relied heavily on dense wool that was treated with natural animal fats, specifically lanolin.
Oh, to make it waterproof?
Exactly. It retained its insulating properties even when soaking wet, so it kept their core temperatures up. But the chafing, the salt sores, the sleep deprivation of sitting upright on a rowing bench in an open boat for weeks on end, it pushes the absolute limits of human endurance.
The chafing alone must have been historical.
Oh, undoubtedly.
And let's layer on the navigational mechanics, too. Today, we cross oceans with GPS and satellite weather mapping. Even a few centuries later, during the Age of Discovery, you had astrolabes and magnetic compasses.
Sure.
These guys in 859 had none of that.
No compasses, no highly detailed charts of the African coast, nothing. What they utilized was an accumulated generational genius for sensory navigation.
Sensory navigation, what does that mean practically?
Well, we know they used sun compasses and potentially polarizing crystals, called sunstones, to locate the sun's position on overcast days.
Wait, like crystals? They use crystals to navigate?
Yeah. These crystals could bend the light and show where the sun was hiding behind the clouds. But beyond those physical tools, they read the environment in ways modern sailors have largely lost.
You mean reading the water itself?
Exactly. They watch the specific flight paths and behaviors of pelagic seabirds. Like a certain bird flying with fish in its beak means land is near.
Wow.
They could also read the diffraction of ocean swells.
What does that mean?
It means they could tell how a deep Atlantic wave pattern changes its rhythm when it bounces off an unseen landmass hundreds of miles away.
That is mind-blowing. They could feel a continent before they saw it.
They really could. They observed the color shifts in the water, the types of kelp floating past. It was a completely holistic, sensory form of navigation applied on the fly in real time to coastlines no Norseman had ever laid eyes on before.
But navigation is only half the battle. Let's do the math on the logistics here, because this is where my mind just short circuits.
Okay, let's do the math.
You have 62 ships. If each ship has an average crew of, let's say, 40 to 50 men,
Right.
we are talking about a mobile force of around 2,500 to 3,000 warriors.
Yes.
You cannot physically pack 3 years' worth of provisions, hardtack, salted meat, fresh water into a clinker-built ship that sits just 2 feet above the waterline.
You absolutely cannot. The displacement of the ship simply doesn't allow for it. And that introduces the terrifying reality of their supply chain.
Which was what?
It was entirely parasitic.
Meaning they had to steal it as they went.
Precisely. Every single landfall is a calculated massive risk. A fleet of 3,000 men consumes an astronomical amount of fresh water and calories every single day.
Right, you can't just skip breakfast when you're rowing all day.
Exactly. And water stored in wooden casks rots and goes stagnant very quickly. So you have to land constantly to find fresh rivers. You have to forage or pillage for livestock.
And they can't exactly pay for it.
No. Furthermore, the ships themselves require intense maintenance. Barnacles and marine growth attach to the hulls over time, creating drag that ruins their speed advantage.
Which is their main weapon.
Right. So periodically, they have to find a safe, hidden beach, drag 62 ships out of the water, and scrape the hulls.
And they are trying to do this maintenance and this foraging in foreign territory where every local magistrate, lord, and farmer wants them dead.
Exactly. It's a hostile environment in every possible way.
It really shifts your perspective. The true achievement of this Mediterranean expedition wasn't just the combat or the silver they brought back, it was the sheer operational survival.
100%.
The fact that an open-air northern fleet sustained itself in volatile Atlantic and Mediterranean weather systems for years without a friendly port is a staggering triumph of naval logistics.
It really forces us to reevaluate the Viking stereotype, doesn't it? They weren't just berserkers swinging axes. They were supreme logistical pragmatists.
Right.
But as they creep down the Iberian coast, that pragmatism runs headfirst into a brick wall, because they are about to encounter a geopolitical entity that fundamentally outclasses them.
Okay, we really need to pause and set the scene here. Because if you are watching modern pop culture shows like Vikings, Valhalla, you are finally starting to see this historical reality depicted on screen.
Which is so great to see.
It is, because for decades, pop history told us the Vikings just fought Anglo-Saxon monks and Frankish farmers. But as Björn and Haystein sail south, they run into the Emirate of Córdoba in Al-Andalus.
And we cannot overstate the power of Al-Andalus in the 9th century.
Break it down for us.
This was not the fragmented, politically divided, technologically stagnant landscape of early medieval England or Francia. This was a centralized, incredibly wealthy, highly sophisticated Islamic empire spanning modern-day Spain and Portugal.
Give us a sense of the disparity. While the Norse are living in timber longhouses, what does Córdoba look like?
Oh, it's night and day. Córdoba was arguably the most advanced city in Europe at the time. We were talking about an urban center with paved streets, street lighting.
Wait, street lighting in the 9th century?
Yes, street lighting, massive libraries containing the recovered works of antiquity, advanced agricultural irrigation, magnificent stone architecture.
Wow.
And most crucially for our Viking fleet, a highly organized professional military apparatus funded by a massive tax base.
So it's not a local lord raising a militia of farmers with pitchforks just because a watchfire was lit on a hill.
Not at all. This is a state engine, a true war machine.
And it gets exponentially worse for Björn because the one thing the Vikings always relied on, the element of utter tactical terror and surprise, is completely gone here.
Completely neutralized.
Why?
That is because Al-Andalus had a long memory. About 15 years prior to Björn's arrival, in the year 844, a different Norse fleet had raided the Iberian coast. They hit Lisbon, Cadiz, and actually managed to sack parts of Seville. The Andalusians eventually mobilized and drove them out, but it was a profound shock to their imperial system.
I bet.
The Arabic historical sources recorded the attackers as the Majus, a term that roughly translates to heathen fire worshippers.
The Majus. So when Björn's fleet shows up in 859, the Emirate doesn't panic. They have spent a decade and a half specifically preparing for the sequel.
Exactly. The Umayyad Emirate didn't just rebuild the walls of Seville, they fundamentally adapted their entire coastal defense doctrine.
What did they do?
Well, they constructed a network of fortified watchtowers along the Atlantic coast to provide early warning. But their true countermeasure was naval. They built a formidable standing fleet of specialized warships specifically designed to intercept and destroy shallow draft raiders.
This is where we really need to look at the clash of military technologies. Because how exactly does an Islamic navy outmatch the legendary Viking longship?
It comes down to two main things: height and incendiaries.
Okay, explain the height part.
The Andalusian dhows and galleys were built much higher off the water than the Norse longships. And in a naval boarding action, height is absolutely everything.
Right, because of gravity.
Exactly. If you are in a longship looking up at a towering galley, you have to climb up while the enemy is raining spears and arrows down on you. It's a massive tactical disadvantage.
That sounds brutal. And what about the incendiaries?
The Arabic sources detail the use of specialized incendiary weapons.
Like Greek fire.
Very similar, yes.
Yeah.
They used naphtha-based incendiary projectors. These were troops known as naphtun.
Okay, and why is that so dangerous to a Viking?
Because think about what a longship is made of: wood and pine tar,
Oh,
right? Pine tar is what waterproofs a longship, but it is highly flammable. When you hit a tightly packed Viking fleet with liquid chemical fire, the psychological and physical devastation is absolute. Water doesn't put it out.
it just spreads it.
Exactly, so they clash. Björn and Hestin attempt their standard hit-and-run tactics, trying to exploit the coastal rivers, but the forces of Córdoba contest them violently.
It's not a walk in the park this time.
No. The Arab historians record intense, heavily attritional naval battles. The Norse take heavy casualties, they lose ships, and they realize they cannot break the Andalusian defenses in the same way they break the Franks.
This is a vital reality check for our understanding of the era. The unstoppable Viking war machine is largely a myth born from survivorship bias, right? Like they usually attack decentralized soft targets.
Exactly. But when a Viking fleet hit a centralized, technologically advanced state with a unified command structure and a dedicated anti-ship navy, they got bloodied. Hard.
It exposes the hard limits of their asymmetric warfare doctrine. Against an imperial war machine, the longship was just outmatched.
It was. But, and this is what makes this specific expedition so legendary, Bjorn and Hestin do not turn around.
They just keep going.
Any lesser commander would have looked at the burning ships, cut their losses, and sailed back to the Loire Valley.
Right, like, well, we tried, let's go home.
But not these two. Instead, they take the hits, they consolidate their remaining forces, and they push further south. They navigate the treacherous currents of the Strait of Gibraltar.
Which is a bottleneck.
Yes.
Yeah.
And once they pass the Pillars of Hercules, they are completely untethered from the world they understand. They are entirely off the map inside the Mediterranean.
And their immediate strategic pivot once inside is fascinating. Because finding the northern coast of the Mediterranean too heavily fortified by the Caliphate, they cross over and strike the coast of North Africa.
Yes, in what is the modern-day Maghreb, specifically the Emirate of Nekor in Morocco.
And this brings us to a part of the expedition that profoundly shifts how we view the Viking Age. Because when they raid North Africa, they aren't just taking gold or silver dirhams.
No.
They take people.
Yes, they do. The Norse sagas and contemporary annals record that during these African raids, the fleet captured local dark-skinned inhabitants.
Right.
The Norse descriptive terms used in the sagas were blamen, which means blue men or simply black men, which was their terminology for North African or sub-Saharan individuals.
And they didn't just ransom these captors back to their local leaders, which was actually a pretty common practice for Viking raiders, right?
Right. Usually they take a hostage, get paid, and leave. But here, they loaded them into the hulls of the long ships and carried them all the way back to their strongholds.
All the way back to Ireland. I really want you, the listener, to let the geography and the profound trauma of that sink in.
It's hard to even fathom.
You have an African captive violently ripped from the sun-baked coast of Morocco, forced into the open, freezing hull of a Scandinavian longship. They are sailed back through the Strait of Gibraltar, surviving naval blockades, weathering the Atlantic storms of the Bay of Biscay, only to be unloaded into the freezing, rainy, completely alien landscape of 9th century Ireland.
The sheer cultural shock and human misery of that journey is staggering.
It is a profound human tragedy, and it represents a dark, unignorable pillar of the Viking Age that often gets glossed over in pop culture.
It really does. We get so caught up in the romance of the navigation and the boldness of the exploration, but we have to confront the fact that the primary economic engine of Norse expansion was the slave trade.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that engine for a second. Because human trafficking wasn't just a byproduct of their raids, it was often the explicit goal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Silver's valuable, yes, but human labor and human capital drove the macro economy of the early medieval world.
It was the currency.
It was. The Vikings established massive slave markets in places like Dublin, Hedeby, and along the Volga River roads. Captives were a high-yield commodity. They could be put to work on farms in Iceland, integrated into households as thralls, or traded eastward to the Abbasid Caliphate in exchange for silver.
And this specific event, bringing North Africans to Ireland, is heavily documented, right? It's not just some saga myth.
No, it is rock-solid history. The fragmentary annals of Ireland from this period explicitly record the arrival of these captives.
Oh.
It was a massive spectacle. These were quite possibly the very first North African or sub-Saharan people ever seen in Ireland. The annals note their arrival as a direct, tangible proof of how unfathomably wide the Viking net had been cast.
It connects three completely disparate continents, Africa, mainland Europe, and the edge of the Atlantic world in Ireland, in this brutal, inescapable web of maritime commerce.
It is deeply sobering. It strips away the heroism and leaves you with the grim reality of 9th century geopolitics.
It really does. But the expedition doesn't stop in Africa. They fill their holds and then they head back into the Mediterranean islands.
Right. They sweep through the Balearic Islands, striking Majorca and Minorca. They are essentially treating the Western Mediterranean like a massive open-air target array looking for vulnerabilities.
Just poking the defenses to see what breaks.
Exactly. But eventually, the seasons catch up with them. Winter is coming, even in the Mediterranean. And as we discussed with their logistics, a Viking fleet cannot stay at sea indefinitely. They need a secure wintering base.
And their choice of a winter base is incredibly strategic. Where do they go? Because they certainly aren't sailing back to the fjords of Norway just to wait out the frost.
No, that would be impossible. They locate a highly defensible, geographically complex region in the south of Francia. They settle in the Camargue.
The Camargue. Okay, for listeners who might not be familiar with French geography, that's the massive, marshy river delta of the Rhone, right?
That is the exact location.
Today, it's a protected wetland famous for wild white horses, black bulls, and flocks of pink flamingos.
Yes. Imagine the surreal visual of that. Hardened Norsemen who grew up navigating ice floes in the Baltic, wintering under a mild provincial sky, surrounded by marshland, salt flats, ancient Roman ruins, and flamingos.
That's absurd.
They pull their dragon-proud ships up out of the water, hiding them among the dense reeds of the delta, and pitch a fortified winter camp.
But they don't just sit by the fire and wait for spring, do they?
Oh, definitely not. They use the Camargue as a forward operating base.
Right. Because the Rhone River is essentially a highway leading straight into the soft underbelly of the Carolingian Empire.
Exactly. They use their shallow draft ships to raid upriver deep into Frankish territory, hitting wealthy towns and abbeys that thought they were completely insulated from the Viking threat.
Because they were hundreds of miles from the northern coast.
Exactly. They hit Nimes, Arles, and Dilongs. They are relentlessly resourceful, turning the geography of their enemies against them.
But all of this, the brutal naval engagements with Córdoba, the capturing of slaves in North Africa, the island hopping, the tactical winter in the marshes, it all feels like a prelude.
It was building up to something bigger.
Because Björn and Hastin have a singular, overarching ambition. They want the ultimate prize.
They want Rome.
Which makes perfect sense psychologically. I mean, if you're going to suffer the misery of a 3-year voyage off the edge of the map, if your entire cultural framework is built on achieving immortal fame, you might as well target the biggest, most mythic city on the board.
You really have to understand what the word Rome meant to a Norseman in the 9th century.
What did it mean?
It carried a weight that was almost supernatural. It was the eternal city, the ancient capital of the world, the seat of the Christian Pope.
Even after the Roman Empire fell?
Yes. Even centuries after the political collapse of the Western Roman Empire, the idea of Rome represented unimaginable wealth, marble architecture, and ultimate glory. Sacking Rome wouldn't just make Bjorn and Hastin rich, it would elevate them to the status of living gods in the sagas.
So, spring arrives. They sail out of their marshy fortress in the Camargue, and they head east along the Ligurian coast to Italy, actively searching for the Eternal City.
Hunting for it.
And eventually they spot it. From the decks of their ships, they see this massive, walled city. It's built of gleaming white stone. It has imposing defenses, beautiful churches, and looks entirely imperial.
It looks like everything they dreamed of.
So Bjorn and Hestein look at this architectural marvel and conclude, we found it. That's Rome.
Except it wasn't Rome.
It wasn't even geographically close.
Not at all.
Yeah.
They had stumbled upon a city called Luni.
Luni.
Yes, it was a prosperous provincial coastal town in northern Italy. Now, to be fair to the Norse navigators, Luni was a deeply impressive city.
It wasn't a tiny village.
No, it was famous for its white Carrara marble, which made it gleam in the sun, and it possessed formidable ancient Roman walls. To a raider accustomed to timber mead halls and earthen palisades, any marble city of that scale looked like the capital of the world.
I just find the geographic confidence hilarious.
Yes.
Did they just refuse to interrogate a local fisherman and ask for directions?
They were very confident men.
Clearly. But regardless of the identity of the city, they are faced with a serious tactical problem. Luni's walls are massive.
And this is where Hastings' genius as an operational commander comes into play.
Okay, the COO steps up.
Right. A direct, over-the-walls assault on stone fortifications using ladders would be suicidal. It would result in massive Viking casualties. Hastings knows that if he loses half his men breaching the wall, he won't have enough manpower to sail the fleet home.
And what good is silver if you're dead?
Exactly. He needs the city intact, and he needs the gates open.
So he pivots from brute force to psychological warfare. He pulls off what is essentially an Ocean's 11-style heist, but in the 9th century.
He devises the ultimate Trojan horse deception.
Walk us through it.
Okay. The Vikings halt their advance. Instead of attacking, they send a small group of unarmed messengers to the heavily guarded gates of Luni under a flag of truce.
Unarmed Vikings, that's suspicious right there.
Very. They present the city guards with a heartbreaking, incredibly manipulative narrative. They say, "We are not here to raid. We are weary travelers, exiles from the freezing north who have been blown off course. We're just trying to find our way home."
We're just lost tourists.
Exactly. But a terrible tragedy has struck our fleet. Our great commander, Hastings, is gravely ill. In fact, he is on his deathbed.
Cue the melancholic string music. It's a total performance.
But the performance has a deeply calculated hook. The messengers continue. With his dying breaths, our leader has had a profound spiritual awakening. The pagan gods have failed him. He wishes to convert to the true faith. He wants to be baptized so that his soul might find salvation in your Christian heaven.
Oh my God.
Will you, the pious and merciful leaders of this great city, deny a dying man the grace of God?
It is brilliant because it weaponizes the exact worldview of the defenders. And the Bishop of Luni, who is standing on the wall listening to this, is probably thinking this is the geopolitical PR coup of the century.
Oh, absolutely.
The fierce, terrifying heathen warlord humbled before the cross.
The city takes the bait completely. They open the gates. A small contingent of Vikings carries Hasdun inside on a litter. He is groaning, pale, playing the part of a dying man with absolute theatrical perfection.
Give him an Oscar.
Right. The bishop himself performs the holy sacrament of baptism. It is treated as this solemn, beautiful moment of spiritual victory. Afterward, the weeping Vikings carry their newly baptized commander back to their ships.
And then they just wait for the sun to go down.
The very next morning, the messengers return to the city gates, wailing in grief. They announce that Hastings has succumbed to his illness in the night.
Oh, how tragic.
But they explain, as a newly baptized Christian, his final dying wish was to be buried in consecrated ground inside the city walls within the great church itself.
You can see the gears turning, and it is just a masterclass in exploiting empathy.
The city leaders, wanting to honor this high-profile convert, agree. They open the main gates wide. A solemn funeral procession enters Luni.
Here we go.
The Vikings are carrying a heavy enclosed wooden coffin. They are walking slowly, heads bowed, playing the role of devastated mourners. They are permitted to walk right through the streets, bypassing all the external defenses, and enter the sanctuary of the main church.
Right into the heart of the city.
Yes,
Yeah.
where the bishop, the nobles, and the city elite are all gathered to pay their respects.
And then the trap springs.
Right in the middle of the Holy Requiem, the heavy lid of the wooden coffin violently bursts open.
Wait, they literally played dead.
Full theatrical performance. Hastings leaps out entirely healthy with a drawn sword in his hand. The weeping mourners throw off their heavy cloaks, revealing hidden axes and mail armor.
Chaos.
Absolute chaos. Before the city guards can even process the betrayal, the Vikings slaughter the bishop and the leadership right there on the altar. In the ensuing panic, they sprint through the streets, butcher the gate guards, and throw the massive city doors open for Björn and the rest of the waiting army to flood in.
It is so cinematic, it almost feels scripted for television. I mean, it's wild.
What is truly fascinating here, historically speaking, is what it tells us about Viking intellect. We categorize them as brutes, but this demonstrates high-level psychological warfare.
It really
They
does.
understood the cultural and religious architecture of their enemies. They knew that Christians held the sanctity of the deathbed and the holy rituals of a funeral as inviolable. They used that piety as the very blade to cut the city's throat.
But then we arrive at the absolute tragicomic punchline of the whole affair.
The best part.
The city falls, the Vikings are plundering the marble villas, loading up carts with silver, high-fiving each other because they believe they have just conquered the capital of the world.
They are celebrating.
And then Hestein interrogates a surviving local magistrate. He likely demands to know where the Pope is. And the terrified magistrate has to explain to this furious Viking warlord, Rome. You aren't in Rome. Rome is over 200 miles south of here.
The realization must have been a crushing humiliation.
We missed Rome.
Yeah. The saga accounts tell us that when Hastings realized his monumental geographic blunder, he flew into an uncontrollable rage. To save face, or perhaps just out of sheer embarrassment, he ordered his men to destroy the city even more thoroughly, massacring the remaining population and burning what was left.
We burned the wrong city, boys. Just tear it all down so no one finds out.
Hide the evidence.
It is the pinnacle of historical irony. A tactical masterpiece completely undermined by a failure to read a map.
It is an incredible narrative.
Okay, but as your host, and as someone who loves a good story but respects the truth, I have to throw a flag on the play here.
I was waiting for this.
We have to put our historian hats on, because whenever a historical account features a legendary warrior jumping out of a coffin at his own funeral to sack a city, my built-in myth detector starts flashing red.
That is fair.
How much of the Luni heist actually happened?
That is exactly the right analytical lens to apply. We must separate the bedrock historical record from the mythic literary embellishments. Let's start with what is indisputable. The expedition itself is completely factual.
The timeline of 859 to 861, the scale of the fleet.
All of it. The crossing of Gibraltar, the heavy naval defeats by the Caliphate, the capture of slaves in North Africa, the winter camp in the Camargue, and the raids along the Ligurian coast of Italy. All of these macro events are corroborated by multiple, completely independent historical traditions.
So the timeline holds up.
It does. You have Frankish monastic chronicles detailing their movements, you have sophisticated Arabic historians recording the naval battles, and you have the Norse sagas celebrating the voyage. When three entirely distinct, deeply hostile cultures all record the same massive geopolitical event, you can accept that framework as historical fact.
Okay, so the bones of the story are solid, but the Luni heist specifically.
That is where the ice gets remarkably thin.
I knew it.
Did a Viking fleet, led by Björn and Hestein, attack the city of Luni? The archaeological and regional historical records strongly suggest that Luni suffered a catastrophic decline and was indeed attacked by raiders around this precise time. But the fake death and baptism trick.
You're going to tell me it's a trope?
It is a classic traveling legend.
It's a traveling legend.
In folklore studies, a traveling legend is a highly compelling narrative motif that detaches from reality and floats through history, attaching itself to various famous figures.
Ah, okay.
You find almost identical stories of clever generals using feigned deaths or fake funerals to gain entry into besieged cities attached to different historical commanders across Europe and Asia.
So it's like a medieval meme.
Basically.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic story, so storytellers graft it onto their favorite cunning rogues. It is highly probable that the coffin trick was a later literary invention woven into the very real, very brutal sacking of Luni. It was meant to elevate Hastings to the status of a trickster archetype, like Loki.
That makes perfect sense. It's the medieval equivalent of how every witty, sarcastic quote on the internet eventually gets attributed to Mark Twain or Winston Churchill.
Exactly.
If there's a legendary deception, the saga writers assign it to the famous Viking rogue.
Exactly. But here's the critical takeaway. Even if we strip away the cinematic coffin trick, the unembellished reality remains staggering.
Yeah, the real story is crazy enough.
Right. A fleet of open wooden boats navigated from the North Sea, forced their way into the Mediterranean, successfully sacked an Italian marble city, and genuinely believed they were hitting Rome. The historical truth is incredible enough without the fiction.
I completely agree. Now, I want to pivot and zoom out a bit, because we've spent the last hour talking about naval warfare, human trafficking, and burning cities.
Right, a lot of violence.
A lot of violence. It paints a picture of a purely antagonistic relationship between the Vikings and the Southern empires. But if you dig into the sources, there is another deeply surprising angle to this cross-cultural contact.
Yes, there is.
It wasn't always violent. Sometimes it was shockingly diplomatic.
This is a crucial layer to add for anyone trying to truly understand the Viking Age. The contact between the Norsemen and the Islamic world, in particular, was complex. It was a relationship built as much on commerce and diplomacy as it was on conflict.
Right. If we look back to that first Viking raid on Al-Andalus in 844, the one that prompted the Caliphate to build their anti-ship navy, the Emir of Córdoba, Abd al-Rahman II, didn't just respond with military force.
He didn't.
He responded like a sophisticated statesman. He sent a diplomatic envoy north.
Yes. Recognizing that these Majus were a persistent threat, but also a potential political entity, the emir dispatched an official embassy to the land of these mysterious northerners.
That is so bold.
That is, the goal was to establish formal lines of communication, negotiate ransoms, and gather vital geopolitical intelligence on who was actually attacking them. And the man chosen to lead this highly dangerous mission was a renowned Andalusian poet, diplomat, and courtier named Yahya ibn al-Hakam, better known by his nickname Al-Ghazal.
Which translates to the gazelle, right?
Yes.
Supposedly because he was incredibly handsome and physically graceful.
That is the tradition. So you have Al-Ghazal, a man accustomed to the absolute zenith of Islamic civilization, a world of marble baths, universities, intricate court poetry, and refined etiquette.
And he's traveling to a rough-hewn northern court.
Exactly. The Arabic accounts are slightly ambiguous about exactly where he landed. Some scholars argue he went to the court of King Horik in Denmark. Others suggest he may have visited a Norse kingdom in Ireland. But his documented observations are a treasure trove of cultural collision.
What did the gazelle think of the Vikings when he was finally sitting in their mead hall?
He viewed them through a fascinating lens of immense cultural condescension, mixed with genuine, almost anthropological fascination.
So he was kind of judging them, but also intrigued.
Totally judging them. He was a sophisticated man, observing what he considered barbarians, but he was struck by their societal norms. One of the most vivid details in his account is his shock at the autonomy and boldness of the Norse women, particularly the queen he interacted with, named Naud.
Because the gender dynamics were entirely alien to him?
Completely. In the Umayyad court of Córdoba, royal women were heavily sequestered in the harem, largely kept out of public diplomatic view.
Right.
But in the Viking hall, the queen was sitting right there on the high seat, drinking, conversing freely with this foreign diplomat, and actively participating in the political discourse.
She was right in the mix.
Al-Ghazal was astounded by her independence, and he actually engaged in a flirtatious, poetic exchange with her that he recorded in his writings.
So let's synthesize this for the listener. Think about what this means for your understanding of the Dark Ages. We picture the Vikings just swinging axes, screaming to Odin, and burning everything they touch. But simultaneously, they are sitting down in timber halls, engaging in high-level geopolitical diplomacy, and trading verses with handsome poets from the Islamic Golden Age.
If you connect these data points, it shatters the one-dimensional barbarian stereotype. The Viking Age was an era of profound, continent-spanning, cross-cultural entanglement. They were part of a massive, intercontinental economic system.
Let's talk about that economy, specifically the silver trade, because that is the lifeblood of this era.
Exactly. The Vikings weren't just taking silver by force. They were trading for it on an industrial scale.
Industrial scale.
Yes. Vast quantities of high-quality Islamic silver coins, called dirhams, flowed north into Scandinavia.
Yeah.
Archaeologists have unearthed massive hoards of these dirhams buried all across Sweden, on the island of Gotland, in Norway, and along the river routes of Russia.
It's all connected.
It is. The Vikings were exporting raw materials, furs, amber, walrus ivory, and, as we discussed heavily, enslaved humans to the Islamic world in exchange for this silver. So Björn Ironside's violent raid was just one aggressive thread in a much larger, incredibly complex tapestry of mutual fascination, deep-rooted trade, and diplomatic exchange that fundamentally shaped both Northern Europe and the Middle East.
It is a geopolitical ecosystem. They're fighting each other, trading with each other, observing each other.
Exactly.
But eventually, all expeditions must end. Bjorn and Hestein have to go home. The ship coffers are full of silver from Luni. They have their African captives in the holds. They've survived the elements. Now they just have to sail back to the fjords.
And this is where the piper demands to be paid. Going off the map into the unknown is difficult. But trying to come back, heavily laden with treasure across the borders of an empire that is now fully aware of your presence and your route,
That's a problem.
that is a strategic nightmare.
Right. If you look at the map of their route, they have to go back out the exact same door they came in, the Strait of Gibraltar. And the Caliphate of Córdoba hasn't forgotten about them.
Not at all. The return journey in 861 was a brutal, attritional ordeal. The formidable Umayyad navy was waiting for them.
Oh, man.
As the scattered, exhausted Viking fleet tried to squeeze back through that narrow geographic bottleneck to reach the open Atlantic, the Muslim warships intercepted them in force.
It's the worst possible tactical scenario.
The Arabic sources are unequivocal that they inflicted a heavy, punishing defeat on the retreating Norsemen. Of the original 62 ships that left Francia, it is estimated that only a fraction, perhaps 20 ships, managed to break the blockade, limp painfully up the coast of Iberia, survive the Bay of Biscay a second time, and finally return to northern waters.
Wow. Only 20 ships out of 62. It completely flips the narrative. This wasn't a triumphant victory lap where they sail into the harbor throwing gold coins to the crowds.
No.
It was a rout.
It was a desperate, bloody escape. They got battered.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this analysis, I have to ask the ultimate question. Why do this?
That's the big question.
If an expedition is so incredibly costly, if you lose 2/3 of your fleet, thousands of your men, and most of your treasure just trying to get out the door, what is the historical point?
To answer that, we have to synthesize the three major historical takeaways from this incredible voyage. First, from a geopolitical standpoint, it definitively shatters the myth of the local North Sea raider.
Björn and Hestein proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Vikings were global operators, capable of projecting complex naval force across thousands of miles and sustaining multi-year campaigns.
Right. They proved they could strike anywhere there was water.
Second, as we saw vividly at Gibraltar and during the initial coastal clashes, the expedition proves the hard limits of their military power. It defines their boundaries.
Where they couldn't push through.
Yes. When they fought unified, technologically advanced states with standing navies and centralized command, they lost. It proves they were brilliant asymmetric raiders, but they were not invincible conquerors of empires.
But the third point is the psychological one, isn't it? The true why.
Yes. The third point encapsulates the ultimate philosophical driver of the Norse mindset, the sheer, restless, insatiable hunger for fame.
Because they believed in leaving a legacy.
In Old Norse culture, there's a core concept tied to honor and reputation, expressed perfectly in the Havamal, the poem of Odin. It says, "Cattle die, kinsmen die, you yourself will also die, but word fame never dies for the one who achieves it well."
Word fame.
To the Norse, the only true immortality was being remembered in the sagas. Björn Ironside didn't just want silver. Silver gets spent. He wanted a story. He wanted to be the man who pushed past the edges of the earth, who struck the great empires, who brought back things no one in the North had ever seen.
And he did that.
And despite the horrific cost in blood and timber, he achieved exactly that. He won his immortality.
He traded a fleet for a legacy. He ensured his name would be spoken around fires for 1,000 years. And honestly, it worked. We are sitting here over a millennium later, analyzing his command decisions.
We are. But before we finish, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought. Something that isn't explicitly spelled out in the texts, but is the inevitable, heavy implication of everything we've just discussed.
What's that?
Picture the scene on those 20 battered ships that actually survived the blockade and are limping north.
Set the final scene for us.
Think about the sheer linguistic, cultural, and psychological chaos happening on those wet, freezing wooden decks as they cross back into the cold northern latitudes.
Right, because of everyone on board.
You have Norse pagans, bleeding, exhausted, but victorious in their survival. You have captured Frankish or Italian prisoners from Luni, shivering in a climate they don't understand, mourning a city that burned.
Yeah.
And huddled among them, you have North African captives who speak Arabic or Berber dialects, watching the sun disappear as they are carried toward the Arctic Circle into a world of ice and timber halls.
That is just, it's surreal.
The Viking longship wasn't just a terrifying weapon of war. In a very dark, bizarre, and profoundly human way, it was a floating microcosm of global collision. It forces you to wonder, what happened to the stories those captives brought with them? How did the fragments of the Arabic language or memories of the African sun filter into the oral traditions of Ireland and Scandinavia? The Vikings didn't just change the world they attacked inevitably, inextricably changed them.
Wow. A floating microcosm of global collision. That is a heavy, incredible image that is going to stick with me for a long time. Just the absolute whiplash of those vastly different worlds forced together in a 50-foot wooden boat.
It encapsulates the true, complex reality of the Viking Age.
Well, thank you for walking us through the mechanics and the madness of this journey. And thank you, the listener, for coming along with us and diving deep. But the story of Norse expansion doesn't stop with Bjorn returning home. Next time, we look at a Viking who took a totally different geopolitical path. Not a wanderer who came home with exotic stories and scars, but a conqueror who decided to stay.
A man who realized that ruling land was more profitable than raiding it. The man who traded his longship for a French dukedom.
Exactly. The man whose descendants would forever change the course of European and English history. Join us next time for the story of Rollo of Normandy. But until then, just imagine the peaceful blue Mediterranean water, the bells ringing, the sun shining, and then look out at the horizon and watch the dragons glide in. We'll see you next time.